everyone. I call the meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Policy to order. Pursuant to the order of the House dated April 11th, a change in the composition of the Subcommittee on Committee Business is required. I'll now entertain a motion for the replacement of Subcommittee member Ms. Martin. Yes, MPP Smith.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I elect Ms. Pierre as Subcommittee.
You can nominate Ms. Pierre, for sure.
I nominate.
Excellent.
I nominate Ms. Pierre.
Thank you.
For Subcommittee.
Any discussion? Are members ready to vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Congratulations, Ms. Pierre. We're now going to proceed with public hearings on Bill 166, an act to amend the Ministry of Training, Colleges and University Act. The clerk of the committee has distributed the documents via SharePoint to all the members to ensure that everyone who speaks is heard and is understood. It's very important that participants to our public hearings speak clearly and slowly. Please wait to be recognized by the chair, and as always, comments and questions should go through the chair. Are there any questions by members before we move forward? Okay. I'd now like to ask the Honourable Jill Dunlop, the Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, to present. Minister, you're going to receive 20 minutes to make an opening statement, followed by 40 minutes of questions by members of the committee. The questions are going to be divided in 2 rounds of 7.5 minutes to the government members, 2 rounds of 7.5 minutes to the official opposition, and 2 rounds of 5 minutes for the independent members of the committee. And I'm going to provide reminders of the time for the presenters and during the questions. So, Minister, if you want to state your name for Hansard, you can begin your presentation.
Well, thank you, Chair. My name is Jill Dunlop, Minister of Colleges and Universities. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I would like to start off by thanking all MPPs who spoke so passionately to this bill during second reading. I know we can all agree on the importance of post-secondary institutions in not just educating and training, but as economic drivers and employers in many of our communities. We all know the importance of supporting students and mental health and anti-hate on campuses, and I would like to thank all members of the chambers for unanimously supporting second reading of this bill. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024 in more detail for all of you today. All students in Ontario, domestic, out of province, and international, deserve to learn in a supportive, safe, and respectful environment. That's why I'm proud to bring forward 3 initiatives that are about continuing to create the right conditions for student success. They are about supporting affordability, inclusive and safe learning environments, all while our government is making historic investments into Ontario's post-secondary education system. The first set of amendments in the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024 is a top priority for my ministry, the mental health and well-being of post-secondary students. These amendments, if passed, will require colleges and universities to have a standard policy in place for mental health, wellness supports, and services for students. This will ensure that students in all corners of the province have a baseline of supports and services that they can access, with clear instructions on where and how to access them. Going forward, institutions will also have to report annually to their Board of Governors on the implementation and effectiveness of these policies and conduct reviews of these policies at least once every 5 years. These amendments will also allow for the issuing of a ministerial directive that can provide further direction to colleges and universities about the topics and elements in their student mental health policies. This will help build common ground amongst the institutions while also allowing them to take a tailored approach that meets the unique needs of their student communities. As an added measure, our government will help institutions enhance mental health supports by investing $23 million, including $8 million for the post-secondary mental health action plan over 3 years, starting in 24-25. The mental health challenges that students face have become increasingly complex, and Ontario's institutions can attest to this, as highlighted by one of our key stakeholders, the Council of Ontario Universities, following the introduction of this legislation in March. To quote their release, COU welcomes the $23 million for enhanced post-secondary student mental health supports to help ensure access to critical resources. Mr. Chair, I have 3 post-secondary age daughters myself, and I've also taught college students. So I understand the impact academic and personal stressors can have on post-secondary students. I remember back to when I taught at Georgian College that as faculty, we actually took the mental health first aid training program. And this was so important because we're working with young people in that very critical age group where mental health can be a huge factor. So it was important for all of us as faculty members to be able to recognize, because sometimes as a faculty member, you are one of the first people a student may come to for support, or at least wanting to know what other supports may be on campus. The best way to make progress is to ensure that all students have access to the mental health supports that they need. And our government has ensured that over the years, students will be able to access the supports they need, both in person and virtually. That's why our government has enhanced resources for students attending post-secondary institutions across the province. In 23-24, we invested more than $32 million in mental health supports for post-secondary students, including funding provided directly to post-secondary institutions through multiple grants. And with the further investments made in Budget 2024, our ministry's commitment to supporting the mental health and well-being of students only continues to grow. Through our government's efforts, we want post-secondary students to know that they are not alone, and help and resources are available to them 24/7. The legislative amendments proposed today would further build on our government's efforts to support the well-being of students, requiring all public colleges and universities to have blueprints for their mental health supports and services will help students in Ontario have the access to the right resources they need when they need them the most. I think back, Chair, to when I was in university, and I don't remember having access to the kind of services that are available today. Now, come to think of it, I don't think there was much of an online world as there is today. That's why I'm proud that this mental health framework will ensure that all students know about and have access to the services that are available on their campuses. And I want to thank MPP Pierre, who was my parliamentary assistant, for the fabulous work that she did in looking at this mental health framework and the consultations that you did on campuses, because campuses are doing a great work, but we want to ensure that students know the supports that are available to them on their campuses. The second set of amendments in the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024 includes changes that emphasize our government's very clear stance on condemning discrimination, hate, or any form of harassment in our communities. We all agree, Chair, that every student in Ontario has an inherent right to learn in a safe and respectful environment. No student in Ontario can reach their full potential unless they have a learning environment that is safe, respectful, and free of racism and hate. We've all heard reports in the news recently of unsettling incidents happening at colleges and universities here in Ontario, across Canada, and across North America. I'm hearing about them as the minister, just like everyone else is, through social media and in the news. It's very concerning to me, as the Minister of Colleges and University, that incidents of racism and hate on post-secondary campuses have been escalating over the past few months. Since the outbreak of the war between Israel and Hamas on October 7, 2023, the media reported that there have been rising tensions on campuses across Ontario. Many students reported they feel unsafe on campuses due to the instances of discrimination, anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. Concerning incidents that have been reported at institutions throughout Ontario and have involved students, staff, student groups, and visitors to post-secondary campuses. Due to the serious nature of these incidents, institutions have pursued internal or external investigations and many have requested the involvement of law enforcement. While post-secondary institutions have taken action to address these incidents, it's clear that a broader, more proactive approach is needed so that all incidents are dealt with in an appropriate manner. And Mr. Chair, since I was appointed to this position in 2021, I've had the opportunity to speak with students and with faculty members alike and heard directly from them about the incidents of hate on campus and the lack of reporting, lack of follow-up. So this was our primary driver in ensuring that we were bringing anti-hate legislation to the table and as part of this bill. Our government's position on this has been crystal clear. Hate of any kind has no place in Ontario and certainly not at our post-secondary institutions. This does not detract from the fact that colleges and universities should be a place where students feel free to exchange ideas and have open and respectful debate. Since January 2019, all publicly assisted colleges and universities in our province have been required to have a free speech policy that meets a minimum standard prescribed by the government and based on best practices from around the world. This policy protects free speech at colleges and universities, but does not allow hate speech, discrimination, harassment, or any other illegal forms of speech. Free speech policy at campuses apply to all faculty, students, staff, management, and guests, whether on campus or in virtual learning delivered by schools. The Ontario Human Rights Code, which applies to all Ontario colleges and universities, prohibits discrimination on a number of grounds, including race, place of origin, disability, age, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, and more. The safety and well-being of everyone at our post-secondary institutions is a critical responsibility of those leading our colleges and universities. Institutions have a responsibility to provide a safe and supportive learning environment and must adopt appropriate measures to address issues of racism and hate. Since last year, I have sent 2 letters to the presidents of our publicly assisted colleges and universities to remind them of their role in supporting a safe and respectful learning environment and their obligations under the Ontario Human Rights Code. While post-secondary institutions have taken action to address these recent incidents, issues continue to exist today, which means that more needs to be done. That's why, if legislative changes we introduced in March pass, we will require public colleges and universities to have clear, outlined policies in place to combat racism and hate, including but not limited to anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Asian, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. All institutions will be required to have policies and rules in place to address incidents of racism and hate when they do occur. Direction to publicly assisted colleges and universities will ensure greater consistency with how incidents of racism and hate are dealt with and ensure they are dealt with in a timely manner, helping to create inclusive, safe, and welcoming campuses and communities for all students. We will work closely with our post-secondary education and community partners as institutions implement these policies and report on their progress. Together, we can build more diverse and inclusive campus communities where everyone feels safe, welcome, and has the opportunity to succeed. And these legislative amendments will get us one step closer. The College Student Alliance has said it best. These proposed amendments are an excellent step in the right direction. Implementing a specific mental health policy better protects the longevity and security of programs and services for students and ensures that both colleges and universities remain accountable to the students and the ministry. Our government is committed to producing a better future for everyone across the province, for students from all backgrounds, to promote economic prosperity for all. I know that during these challenging times when the rate of inflation and the cost of living is forcing Ontarians to make some tough financial decisions, affordability for students and their families needs to be a priority. To keep cost of education down for hardworking students and their families, we announced in March that Ontario is maintaining the domestic tuition freeze for publicly assisted colleges and universities for at least 3 more years, while allowing limited increases of up to 5% for domestic out-of-province students. This tuition freeze builds on the government's historic 10% reduction of tuition in 2019-2020, along with the tuition freezes over the past 4 years. These changes have made post-secondary education more affordable for Ontario students and their families and must continue. I know that I just mentioned them, but the College Student Alliance was also pleased to see our government maintain the tuition freeze. They were quoted as saying, "The CSA welcomes the additional extension of the domestic student tuition freeze. The current cost of living crisis has negatively impacted students across the province, and we are thrilled to see the government acknowledge the struggles facing domestic students. We recognize that investing in your education is one of the best decisions that you can make as a young person. A college or university education opens so many doors and leads to incredible careers. But having a shared responsibility in your education does not mean that the government or your school should constantly raise your tuition, especially during an affordability crisis. In addition to the tuition fees that students pay, students also pay for learning materials and activities associated with their programs. I have heard directly from students that they don't always have a line of sight on these additional costs until after they have selected their programs. Textbook costs in particular can pose an additional financial burden to students and their families that they were not expecting and couldn't plan for. In fact, textbook costs have increased dramatically over the years by more than 800% since the 1980s. That's more than double the Canadian house price indexes and triple the rate of the Consumer Price Index. Chair, this makes me reflect back to recently when 3 of my daughters were all in post-secondary education at the same time. They'd get their list of textbooks for the semester only to discover that this would cost hundreds of dollars to each. And Chair, I heard directly from students about the cost, and sometimes it wasn't just the cost of the textbooks, but also the additional costs, or maybe subscriptions that students needed to have, additional lab material that would be an additional cost for students, or supplementary information that they may or may not need. These were all additional costs to students. That's why the third set of proposed amendments in the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act 2024 will introduce changes that will require public colleges and universities to follow ministry directives to increase the transparency of student fees, including the learning materials. As mentioned earlier, students have been facing financial burdens due to the costs of materials and activities associated with their programs and courses. Ontario's measures to increase transparency around the costs of ancillary fees will help students prepare for these costs and provide them with greater options when selecting courses. And Chair, I heard from students who had they came to me with a question saying, well, I thought tuition has been frozen, but every year I still continue to see my tuition increase. And that was because of the additional fees. So we want this to be very transparent from the beginning what their education is going to cost for that semester. Chair, our government is committed to helping all learners access and succeed in post-secondary education on their journey so they can further develop the highly skilled workforce that Ontario is so well known for. That's why we've taken significant steps over the past years towards ensuring that learners from all walks of life can access post-secondary education and succeed once they get there. The set of amendments we introduced would go a long way to supporting a post-secondary education system that is affordable, respectful, and inclusive for all learners. We will continue to work with our post-secondary partners to build a post-secondary system that embraces inclusivity and promotes success for all learners so they have an exceptional university or college experience and they are prepared to pursue meaningful and rewarding careers. And I can tell you personally, I've had 2 daughters graduate from the post-secondary education system, and my youngest is about to graduate in the next couple of weeks. So I can personally know the great opportunities that our post-secondary education system brings for our young learners in this province, but also how important it is when we hear from our labor markets. And I know all the exciting companies that are coming to Ontario, one of the reasons they come here is because of the trained workforce we have and the opportunities that we have in our post-secondary system to upskill workers as well. So we have a great system here in Ontario, one that we should all be very proud of. As a minister, I get to tour the province and visit our schools, and I'm blown away every time by the work that I see done at our colleges and our universities. And MPP Sattler and I had the opportunity to be with USA last week during their celebration. And I think one of the faculty members who was receiving an award said it best, that these aren't just the leaders of tomorrow, they are currently leaders right now, and something that we should all be proud of in our community. So with that, I will be happy to turn it back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Minister. We'll begin with the first round of questions. 7.5 minutes to the government. MPP Smith.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I want to begin by thanking the Minister for being here. I truly appreciate the effort that has been put forth. I, too, fair information, I, too, am the mother of 2 post-secondary students. Still in the midst of it. I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but and I congratulate you on your daughter's new accomplishments, and the others as well. So I want to dive into some issues. We talked about students today being the leaders of tomorrow, and the Human Rights Code, and providing a safe environment for our children. And I refer to them as children because they're under 30, and anybody who's under 30 is young in my eyes because of my age. So we know that the Human Rights Code sometimes does not do the job on campus. And every student should have a learning environment. You discussed this. Have a learning environment that allows them to thrive, where hate and racism should not exist. And obviously, after October 7th, it became more prevalent than ever. That students sometimes face an uphill battle on those campuses, and sometimes that hate actually also involves not only other students on campus, but possibly teachers or visitors who aren't actually on campus. So what I'm asking is, what is the need at this time to introduce new anti-hate legislation to support these students? We do have a human rights code, but keeping in mind that sometimes these cries for help are not heard by the universities.
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Smith. And as a mother of 3 post-secondary age daughters, and as I said, one is just completing now, so as a mother and a minister, I take it, nothing's more important to me than the safety and well-being of our students and ensuring that they are supported on and off campus. All students in Ontario have a right to feel safe on campuses, both inside and out of the classroom. While the Human Rights Code are important, Human Rights Act and Code are important pieces, the kind of policies Bill 166 would implement gives students the necessary reassurance that their schools will take matters seriously and with proper attention. It is alarming and disappointing that when we first hear of an incident of hate on campus, it is far too often through the media and correspondence, not from the institution. In some cases, several days can pass before incidents make the news, and my office and ministry team then have to figure out what went on and to ensure the student or group of students are safe, there is an investigation underway, and what other steps could have been taken, many of which should have been started much earlier. We also hear stories from students and parents who reach out to their school about an issue and either don't hear back, or the process ends up hurting students by either taking far too long or failing to address the issues that were brought forward. At the same time, we have institutions who tell us that they need clear tools and guidelines to be able to adequately respond to these situations appropriately. The proposed directives will set the standards that schools and students can rely on to address instances of discrimination and preferably educate faculty, staff, and students alike so that we can collectively work together to prevent future incidents. It is also important to encourage free speech on our campuses. College and universities are places where ideas are to be shared, challenged, and debated freely. And that means we need to be committed to ending hateful exchanges so actual debate can occur. Since January 2019, all publicly assisted colleges and universities have a free speech policy that meets a minimum standard prescribed by the government and based on best practices from around the world. As the minister, it is my duty to ensure our schools stay free from hate, which is why Bill 166 is so important. We all have a role to play to provide students and staff with a safe environment that is conducive to their education. And anything short of that is completely unacceptable, which is why Bill 166 will play a pivotal role in allowing the government to step up and be a part of the solution. I know, as I said, many of us have children who are in the post-secondary system now, some who are probably approaching that age too, but as government members and as parents, we all want to ensure that campuses are safe in this province. Thank you.
So you provided some really great information. You talked about standards, which is so important, and a unification so that it exists. We know that there are standards within each college. I have constituents come into my office quite often, and they talk about, very sadly, they have stories about their children. And sorry, I'm referring to them children because they're under 30 once again. And they're so sad because these students have faced hate. And sometimes it's never adjudicated, which is, it breaks my heart because when somebody asks for help and it's not provided. I'm wondering if you could tell us how that's going to help the students in Ontario when they know they can get that help and know that a standard is in place.
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Smith, and I believe you're actually going to hear from some students this afternoon who have faced challenges on campus and have dealt with exactly what you're asking me about, the lack of follow-up. And that's what I've heard from students and faculty members alike over the past couple of years. I've talked to some faculty members who met with me from University of Ottawa, University of Toronto, and just their concerns. But many students and student groups across the province who brought this suggestion forward, or their complaint was that when they were reporting incidents of
There's 1 minute remaining in this round.
Hate of any sort on campus, that they almost felt like there was no point in reporting it because there was no set standards, there was no follow-up, there was really no reporting mechanism in place. So what we are looking to do as part of this legislation is to ensure that whether you make a report at George Brown College or TMU, that the reporting mechanism will be the same across the board. And I feel that students will feel safer when they know that this is actually being taken seriously through the school. And as I mentioned too, the incidents that are happening on campuses, I would hear about it in the media just like everyone. There was no reporting to the ministry. So this will be part of that mechanism, the transparency, but it will also be posted for the public. So I think it's important that the public understands that, yes, there may be incidents happening, but what is the follow-up and the action by the schools is important to understand that they are taking action.
Thank you, Minister.
Well.
Thank you for this round. I'll now ask the official opposition, MPP Sadler.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Minister, for coming to the committee today. I wanted to begin with a comment you made right at the beginning of your remarks about the so-called historic investment that the government has made in colleges and universities. And as Minister, full well, the blue ribbon panel, the expert panel that you appointed to provide recommendations on ensuring the sustainability of our post-secondary sector, released a report in November and said that institutions need an additional $2.5 billion in permanent base funding in order to remain financially viable. And that report was released before the reduction in international study permits, which your own budget anticipates an additional shortfall of $3 billion for colleges in this province. We don't know how much money is going to be lost in the university sector. So my question is, given the Blue Ribbon Panel report, why did your government not follow through on an increase in permanent operating grants and instead allocate short-term 3-year funding that is much, much less than was recommended by the Blue Ribbon Panel?
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Sattler. And yes, you're familiar with the $1.3 billion that we announced, and this was a historic investment, the largest investment that we've seen in post-secondary education in a decade, and something that I'm very proud of. And you mentioned the Blue Ribbon Panel and the recommendations that were brought forward. The Blue Ribbon Panel also acknowledged the shared responsibility across the sector, a responsibility for government, for the post-secondary institutions themselves, as well as the schools. The students. We didn't see at this time that should be a responsibility of students, the burden of increasing tuition, and that's why we looked at the increasing the funding for schools to the $1.3 billion. And I think it's really important because we're going to work very closely, as we always do. Part of that $1.3 billion is $903 million in funding. And we are already working with our schools on what that allocation is going to look like for each institution. And yes, we were hit from the federal government with the international students, and so we're working closely with the schools on that as well. And I'm sure you'll see, and you've probably heard from your institutions, we focused on a real labor market-driven allocation, and we came up with a formula that best supported all of our institutions and had the least impact across the board. But with that being said, part of the $1.3 billion is also the efficiency fund to help schools find efficiency, because we know there is a responsibility of the schools as well, and we're going to work very closely with them. That fund is there to allow schools to conduct audits, to find efficiencies, but it's not just on the schools to find those efficiencies. We have a responsibility as government, and we're going to work very closely. We already have ideas that are being brought forward from COU and CO on possible legislative measures that we can take as government to help them find those efficiencies as well.
Thank you, Minister. We actually agree that students should not have to bear an additional financial burden at this time of a cost of living crisis. However, the Blue Ribbon Panel said $2.5 billion is needed in permanent base funding. That should be publicly funded by the government, and the government provided less than half of that. But I wanted to talk about the funding that was included in the government's historic investment for post-secondary mental health action plan. So there is $8 million allocated for the post-secondary mental health action plan over 3 years. When you do the math, that's $2.7 million per year. And when you consider that there are 47 institutions in place, we're looking at an additional $57,000 for each institution in direct mental health student supports. And I wanted to read some findings of a study that was done by HECO in response to your ministry's request to look at mental health supports in Ontario colleges and universities. And they talked to staff who are in our colleges and universities who are delivering student mental health supports. And almost half of the staff who were interviewed talked about challenges due to funding, unpredictability, short spending periods. One staff noted there are some one-time grants for mental health, but you'll hit a deficit the next year because you can't add permanent services with one grant. Sometimes the money is there, but there's no longevity to it. Another staff talked about the challenges of retaining staff, said not knowing how much funding will be coming through for next year makes it difficult to staff or keep a service. There is high turnover because of this. Another staff talked about the need for more advanced expertise and the challenges getting that expertise on campus. So given that this HECA report came out in January 2024, and you certainly know about the financial challenges facing institutions in delivering mental health supports for students, why did you decide to allocate only $57,000 per institution?
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Sattler. And the $8 million, there's also the $23 million that was recently announced as well. And I want to thank our institutions for the incredible work that they are doing. As I mentioned, MPP Pierre has had an opportunity to tour the schools, as I have as well, during COVID times and after. And it's interesting to see the changes that our institutions have made to the mental health services that are offered on campus. We have lots of great programs, and our schools are doing a fantastic job. To name a few of the programs, the Mental Health Services Grant, that's $6 million. The Mental Health Worker Grant, $4.5 million. The Good to Talk, it's a free 24/7 mental health helpline for students, $5 million, because we acknowledge that students aren't always accessing the services that are offered on campus in person, but that they prefer the virtual options
Thank you,
as well.
Minister. We'll now move to the independent member, MPP Clancy. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I guess I was looking at the response from some of your partners, and I guess their concern is that these directives seem to feel like red tape. So I know in school boards, for example, it was a great initiative to get EDI data and have EDI staff, but it doesn't come with funding. Now, just to echo MPP Sattler, I guess the worry is that when you add the red tape, you undo some of the funding initiatives that you've added. So when you provide funding, it helps you hire more people, but then when you have to use that money to do a lot of paperwork, et cetera, or not trust the work that's already happening on college and university campuses, that it undermines the funding that you did propose. Can you speak to how this might be adding red tape that a lot of colleges and universities are indeed doing a lot already and already have a framework for mental health and so on?
Sure. Thank you, MPP Clancy, for the question. I think obviously we don't want to burden schools with adding red tape. I think we're a government of reducing red tape, and I want to ensure that I'm not adding additional burden to the schools. But this is work that, some are doing it well, some not as much, but we want to ensure that there is a clear process across schools, whether it's for the mental health framework or for the anti-hate policy, that we want students to know where and when to access these supports. So the mental health framework, I mentioned schools do a great job, but we want to ensure that the services, the programs that are offered on campuses also meet the needs of students. So if you have a campus that's primarily students who they return home in the summer, we want to ensure they also have services that are available virtually for those students to be able to access those services. We don't want students to leave school in April and have to go back to their communities and possibly wait for services there when they return to school in the fall. So ensuring that the services that are offered on the campuses are adequate. So it's just bringing everything together, making it more transparent for students. With the anti-hate, and again, I think for both of these are things that should be done anyways by the schools. I think we can all agree, and I know our schools will agree, they want to ensure that students have access to the supports that are available to them, but that they're also feeling safe and supported. And so with the anti-hate piece, that's where we were finding that there was just, across the board, there was no similar policies in place. So I think by having this, we're not creating a burden. This is something that schools should have been doing already, but we will be working with them. So I will ensure there's not any red tape burden associated with this process.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to say that I think, just to echo from the Blue Ribbon panel, that the funding needs to be more sufficient. As a school social worker, this was my work, was dealing with student mental health in the elementary and secondary school system, and the biggest barrier for myself and staff, my colleagues, was the ratio. So I do know that $57,000 isn't adequate to even hire one full-time person, that we had a hard time keeping staff unless it was permanent full-time. So I do agree that the base funding needs to happen in order to make sure that you can recruit quality staff and that they can continue to work there and have longevity. Turnover of staff is one of the most negative impacts on student mental health. The other concern I have is the follow-through on the hate. I know I conducted violent threat risk assessments, for example, and you need highly trained staff to address threats on campus. I'm worried that if we simply make a directive and have something in writing
1 minute remaining,
without the staff who can actually follow up and are qualified and trained and highly skilled in addressing risk, that indeed you won't see that impact. I worry that this will impact some free speech while not having the follow-through to prevent violent incidences like happened at University of Waterloo. Can you explain how you could properly fund staff to address risk when it comes to hate?
Well, thank you for the question, MVP Clancy. And so you've seen firsthand how important this will be on our campuses, ensuring that there is a transparent process in place, that when a student or a faculty staff member makes a complaint or reports an incident of hate on campus, that it is adequately followed up, reported, and that there is an action plan in place. So we'll work closely with the schools, and we're working through that process now on what the policy and the reporting mechanism will look like as we move forward.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move to the government's second round of questions. MPP Pierre.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. So during the last year, I guess. Yeah. Oh. So, as you mentioned, during the last year, I did have the opportunity to tour most of the colleges, universities, and some of the Indigenous institutes across the province. And three of the things that I heard consistently in speaking with students especially were concerns around mental health, concerns around anti-hate and racism, and concerns around costs associated with attending post-secondary. And so I'm really happy and pleased to see this legislation come forward, because I think it really connects with the concerns that students are feeling. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit, or perhaps ask you some questions about tuition, costs for attending post-secondary, fees, where tuition fees and dollars are going. So I know it's a benefit for students to know where their hard-earned dollars are going, and so I appreciate the work that you've done and the legislation that's in front of us around transparency and accountability when it comes to costs, and providing students with an explanation of where their hard-earned dollars are going. So I'm hoping you can tell the committee a little bit more about why you think this change is a positive step for students, and why you think it's necessary to make a directive around it.
Well, thank you for that question, MPP Pierre. And when our government was first elected in 2018, Ontario had the highest average tuition across Canada. And that's why we made the historic 10% tuition cut in 2019. And we immediately started seeing the positive impact to students, including providing an estimated $450 million of relief to students. Since then, Ontario has dropped to 4th place in tuition, and we hope to see that number continue to drop now that the tuition freeze is in place until 2027. I know all of us have been a student at one point in our life, or we currently have children attending, but we know how expensive the whole experience can be. And Ontario students deserve to have access to high-quality post-secondary education at affordable rates. Everything from tuition to books to housing, they all add up. And now that we are in the midst of an affordability crisis, it is now more than ever important for students to have access to an affordable education. That's why our government made a historic investment of $1.3 billion that invests in our students without funding the system on their backs. But I've said it many times before, education is a shared responsibility. So when I hear students and their stories that they are charged new fees by their school and the cost of their education is going up, it is concerning. The same goes for stories about students who choose one course over another because it was more affordable, only to see that there are 3 required textbooks that cost hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars for their combined school year. That is simply unacceptable for the hardworking students who are the future of our province. But education costs need to be clear and transparent, full stop. Like looking at any other major financial decision, like buying a house or a car, you have the opportunity to review the costs and will be able to make a decision accordingly. You don't go in and buy a car and then find out there's extra additional costs when you go to pick up the keys. So you know what you can afford and are in charge of your finances. Not providing students the same opportunity for textbooks or other learning costs is harmful to students, which is why I believe we need to have a clear directive around the costs of these items so students can make clear and informed choices regarding their education.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
3:14.
Good. Minister, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Just like you, I'm a father with a daughter in post-secondary. So, of course, I am great concern on her mental health as well. So, just like our government, which is very concerned about the mental health of Ontario's post-secondary students. So, something I'm sure that you have an acute understanding as a former faculty. And everyone thinks that students should feel supported on campus and have access to help if they need it. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on how this bill builds on the previous work that you have done and the Ministry of Colleges and University has done.
Well, thank you for that question, MPP Pang, and congratulations to you as a father and to your daughter. I hope she's had a successful school year as it comes to an end. As a former college staff member, I saw firsthand that students find it difficult to balance the demands of their academic and their personal lives. The mental health and well-being of students is vital to their academic success and personal success. And I know we've heard stories around the table today of the experience that many of us have had either working with students at all levels of education or with our own children at home. But we owe it to our students to ensure they're supported throughout their post-secondary journey. We all bring things into our school or work from our personal lives, and it can be really hard at times to separate that, especially for students who live on campus and cannot separate their lives. So when a student is in need of mental health supports, it is important that those resources and supports are available to them so they can focus on their schoolwork and not worry about whether they can get the supports they need. I know when I was working at Georgian College and working with students, it was interesting to hear the various backgrounds. Not all students are coming to us directly from high school. Some are returning after another career. Some are balancing children at home as well. And I remember even in my own university career having one of my good friends who was a mature student who had 2 children at home. And I remember thinking, how does she ever balance all of this with school and work? Before I became Minister of Colleges and Universities in June of 2021, MCU's allocation for mental health was just under $20 million for the sector and other partners like Good to Talk, which I mentioned earlier. This year, we are investing $32.1 million, and that is a substantial increase for students and for schools to ensure that we are providing the necessary resources to support our sector. We also understand that students cannot always access in-person resources or actually prefer virtual resources, which is why we have been major supporters and funders of groups like Good to Talk and Get Ahead, which allows students to access mental health supports wherever and whenever is most convenient for them. Sorry, I thought you were going to cut me off. I'll just keep going. Thank you.
Got about 12 seconds.
You gave me that look. These 2 specific programs that I just mentioned have helped thousands of students, not to mention all of the other institution-specific resources that students have access
Minister.
to.
I'll move to the last round for the official opposition. MPP Sattler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I wondered if you could tell us why Bill 166 empowers the minister to dictate the content of the student mental health policy and the anti-hate policy instead of requiring extensive consultation with students, faculty, staff, community, and experts in the development of these policies.
Thank you, MPP Sattler, for the question, and that's a great one. And these ideas were brought to us through students and what we were hearing on campuses and meeting with students. And it's bringing the resources together. So if you're looking at the mental health framework, these are supports that are already on campus. So what we're looking for is to bring them all together so that students understand what is available to them on campus and how they can access those services. Because we were hearing from students, and MPP Pierre brought this to us. Students were saying, I don't necessarily know what's available for me on campus, but yet we know there's already great things happening. We fund those programs, and I know that there's great services, but students were saying we don't necessarily know where to find them. So this was in conjunction with working with students.
Okay, thank you. It's not a question of where to find the policies. It's the fact that the minister is giving herself, or whoever is in that position, the minister is being empowered by this bill to determine, to dictate the contents of those policies. And I think that is a big concern because there are legitimate questions about what these ministerial directives are going to include. And everyone knows that for policies to be successful, you need to have the involvement of everyone who's going to be affected by those policies. That's faculty, that's students, that's staff, that's community. And you need to have the experts who understand student mental health, who understand how to respond to reported incidents of hate. But a related question is around the provisions of this bill to exempt the ministerial directives from the requirements of the Legislation Act. All three of the components of this bill, the student mental health policy, the anti-hate policy, and the financial directives, are exempted from the Legislation Act. And as the minister knows, the purpose of the Legislation Act is to ensure transparency so that the people of Ontario can understand what the government is bringing forward. So my question is, why did the government decide to exempt the directives that are going to be issued under this act to the normal provisions that are laid out in the Legislation Act?
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Sattler. And doing this as a directive allows us to act faster, to be more flexible and responsive to what's actually happening on campus. So it's also the least intrusive and also maintains the autonomous nature of our schools. So the directive will be issued, but there's also opportunities to change that. So if we feel that it's not working the way it should be, or we're hearing feedback from the schools, we're able to change. So this is actually allowing us to work faster with the schools.
Okay, thank you, Minister. It's not the issue. Well, there is an issue with enabling the minister to issue a directive. However, you can still issue a directive and still be subject to the Legislation Act. So this bill exempts the government from any of the transparency safeguards that are included in the Legislation Act, and I think that is a legitimate concern. The third question I would like to raise with you is around the consequences. The bill gives the minister carte blanche, full power to specify what steps you will take if colleges and universities don't comply with your specific directives about what is to be in the content of their student mental health policy and their anti-hate policy. Can you tell us what consequences you are considering for colleges and universities that don't comply with these directives that you will be issuing?
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Sattler. I think back up to, we were talking about the directive, it will actually increase the transparency of a mental health policy, our framework on campus, as well as the anti-hate policy. That's what we're looking for, is transparency to the general public as well. As far as consequences, we're working with CO and COU, and what we were hearing from schools is that they needed the tools, and this is what we're doing. We're providing those tools. We're working to ensure that there is an anti-hate policy on campus, and that is a policy, as I mentioned, across the board, whether you're at one college or another or university, that there is a similar mechanism in place that when a student or a faculty member reports an incident of hate on campus, that it's dealt with in the same manner. We will be working closely, and what we heard for consequences is education is the key piece.
Thank you, Minister. I think that transparency would be ensured if there is extensive consultation with faculty, students, staff, and communities where post-secondary institutions are located, but that's not included in your bill. I also think that transparency would be ensured if the provisions of the Legislation Act that relate to the transparency of government initiatives were not exempted under this bill. So I have some major concerns about the lack of transparency of Bill 166. But just to get back to the funding concerns. When your government's investment in post-secondary education fell so far short, half of what the Blue Ribbon panel had recommended was needed in permanent base funding. But when your government has underfunded institutions to such an extent...
MPP Pierre?
I don't think we're here to talk about the Blue Ribbon panel. We're here to talk about mental health funding, anti-hate and racism, and transparencies around fees as outlined in Bill 166.
The Minister talked about the historic investment in her comments. But my question is, given the underfunding of our colleges and universities, how does she expect staff and faculty at our colleges and universities to respond to concerns about student mental health and anti-hate, and to implement these policies that the Minister is going to dictate?
Well, thank you for the question, MPP Sattler. And
Minister, unfortunately, that's the end of the time for this round. MPP Clancy, you've got the remaining 5 minutes for questions.
I would like to raise that again. I know that there was some earmarked dollars for mental health. I do agree that more needs to happen, but I didn't see the funding that was allocated to follow through on the staffing and capacity building that needs to happen and to ensure that the anti-hate directive is effective. Can you speak to that? Why is there no dollars for that?
No, thank you, MPP Clancy. And no, that's an important part. I think I was actually asked that question during my lead-off debate time. This is something that schools should have already been doing. We want to ensure that when students are on campus, that it is a safe learning environment. So having a policy in place is something that schools should have been doing already. So having this policy in place, ensuring that schools are safe, respectful learning environments is a priority. And it's what we heard from students and from faculty members alike who were talking about incidents and not having a reporting mechanism in place. There was never a follow-up. So I'm sure that there's, the number of incidents are probably higher than what's actually reported because students aren't reporting it. They're saying, what's the point in doing this if there's never any follow-up? I could have graduated and find out years later.
My question is about the dollars, though. Like, as someone who was hired full-time to do that work in our elementary and secondary school, you need people to do those things, and you need to pay them. So where's the funding to make sure that that happens? Like, a policy is great on paper, but we know that websites cost money, staff to answer the phone costs money, workers to investigate a threat or a hate incident costs money. So, can I ask why that's missing?
Well, thank you for the question. And we've constantly increased the mental health supports on campus because we recognize the need. I've mentioned being a mom. I've seen from my own children, being in the classroom. I've seen from students the the mental health pressures, the stress of being in school, the stress of balancing everything while you're going to school. But we continue to see an increase in mental health, specifically in post-secondary, but the mental health supports that we see from the Ministry of Health as well in our communities. And I know speaking with MPP Co, he's often mentioned the importance of our institutions collaborating with the community resources that are already offered so that students, when they return home in the summer, often have those supports locally as well.
Well, and that would be helpful because I know we're needing more in the community to address incidents of hate. The colleges brought up that they're at 44, we come in last place in terms of funding per student, that we were only 44% per student in contrast to the average of the rest of the Canadian provinces, so 44% of the national average. So we know that these lead to higher ratios and less, and colleges are spending a lot of money, and universities are spending a lot of money already on student services. My follow-up question, I guess, will have to do with the direction you're going by going around some of the governance in universities and colleges. The Council of Ontario Universities recommends that instead of a directive from the government, which is, we talk about respecting municipalities and not and letting them have their unique governance, that the direction should come through the Lieutenant Governor and Council. May I ask why you've kind of gone around the existing governance in universities to get involved? To me, that seems a bit of an overreach, but.
No, thank you for the question of PP Clancy. That's a good question because I have spoke with COU about their concerns and doing it through an OIC, but a directive will make it faster and more flexible. If we made a change and then needed to go back, we'd have to do it, go back again through legislation. And so doing a directive rather than OIC is just faster and flexible and more responsive to the needs of the school. So if we find that the directive that's in place is not necessarily matching what we were intending it to, and we're hearing that from institutions, then we can, again, change it and work with them and work faster to make those changes, rather than if it was through legislation and having to go through the work to change those.
Okay. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Minister, for appearing today. Thank you to the members. The committee will stand recessed until our hearings resume at 1 p.m.